I'm John Durcan. I'm the Chief Technologist for I.D.A. Ireland. Just very quickly this morning, I'm just going to talk through a little bit about who I.D.A. Ireland is in case somebody doesn't know, just for the context around that. But then I'm going to talk about about Ireland and the ecosystem and FDI and opportunities with open source and collaboration as well within the wider academia community. So just at a quick thing, I.D.A. Ireland, we are the government agency that's responsible for attracting foreign direct investment into Ireland. My role is very much as the chief technologist, is working, my own background in machine learning and AI, is working with companies and establishing out R&D and what does that look like. And collaboration quite a lot within the context of both the European Union and also with Irish academia and also with industry. So it's kind of like my role is to kind of bring them all together. And like Kieran there earlier on, all that regulation and everything, and unfortunately going through all of that at the moment as well. But you can see the vision there is really, Ireland wants to position itself as kind of a thought leader and a go-to place for doing everything to do with research and development. And within that, we see the open source part is a huge part within that to develop it going forward within that. It doesn't always just have to be on the private side of it. You can see here some of the ambitions to what I.D.A. wants to do over the next up to 2029 in our strategy. The big thing which I would call out there is the 7 billion investment in RD&I. Like, this is a huge thing we want to see from within industry, particularly in that piece. But what that means is across a range of industries. And I'd also call out over there on the right hand side is looking there at collaboration. This is a huge part of what we're looking at. When we look in terms of our strategy around this, there's just 4 key areas. But what I want to touch on here is some examples of open source within this and what we're seeing. So when we talk about digitalization and AI within that, a lot of the companies we're starting to engage with are now looking at how they're going to be using AI within their business models. What does that look like? We're starting to see kind of a combination of from private models, but more and more so a movement using open source models around that. The challenges that they're starting to find then around that is in relation to regulatory side, cybersecurity is a huge challenge that's coming up, security of models, safety of models. And so there's a huge opportunity we're seeing from companies that they're now starting to look at, okay, there's more open source out there, there's more proprietary models, there's some small language models along with large language models and open source. What does that look like? In semiconductors, one of the big things we're doing here is there's a Spanish company called OpenChip. So they're doing a lot of work around RISC-V and kind of that next generation kind of open source for within that community. What we're seeing in the semiconductor sector as well, which is quite interesting. So you have companies like Qualcomm, who along with that in their aspect and what they're looking at doing is they are optimizing models to run on their hardware. But not alone are they just doing for proprietary models like ChatGPT, but also they're taking all of the open source models and optimizing them to run on their different hardware, both at a device level, which would be really interesting opportunities going down the way when you think about what that could face into, and also into data centers and services in there. So that's kind of a growth area. The other big thing we're seeing is on sustainability. And this is really interesting when we talk about power management and going into that, particularly, so not so much around, I suppose, the heat pumps and that side of sustainability, but more around on the tech side. So as you're talking about power efficiency, power management, AI models, efficiencies within that, new methodologies for coming up with power management, new software systems that's needed within that, hugely important, but also critical for infrastructure. And there's a huge challenge in cybersecurity, but it's also creating a massive opportunity in open source and collaboration on that as we look at interoperability at scale going into the future around sustainability. And health is a massive one, and I'm sure there's been loads of conversations already about this sector. But fundamentally as well, as we talk about interconnected devices, edge AI, connected, where that goes, the open source piece we see is a lot of opportunity in terms of research in that side. This is just a quick slide to give you an overview of activities within Ireland who are doing AI. But the key thing I want to call out of this is these companies all have large R&D hubs within it. And within all of those that I would say that I've talked to, open source is part of all their discussions and what they're doing around R&D. So it's just to kind of get out the scale that's out there. It's not all proprietary within a lot of this. The other big thing, I suppose, and this the part of the role I do, is involvement in the Irish ecosystem. And you can see here kind of a map of the all of the ecosystem that we have in terms of the research centres and the universities. But also, one interesting area there, as you can see along the top, is all of the kind of core areas of technologies that we're looking at doing within that. And one thing that a lot of the work I do engage with companies is introducing them into their wider ecosystem, both here within Ireland, but also looking at the European level. And a lot of those discussions, you can see there is cybersecurity. Karen was talking about some of that there. The blockchain, we've talked about kind of open source on that side, as we all know. AI, Industry 5, connected health. Biologics is a really interesting emerging area. And that one is something, again, we're thinking there's opportunities within open source for working with companies within that. And then finally, just then to wrap up, is just kind of talking about some of the funding supports that's available. So what you can see here, these are kind of a mixture of industry grants that are available to do R&D. But from our perspective, when we fund R&D, we fund a project. It doesn't have to be purely commercial in that sense there. It can also be on the open source. What we've seen a lot of companies doing, particularly this innovation partnership one, where we have industry collaborating with universities, more and more of them, ironically, to get around IP issues, are actually looking at using open source pieces with collaboration. And so what that has been is kind of a win-win. Industry is getting something out there. The universities are also being able then to get really, I suppose, kind of cutting-edge approaches and new methodologies to explore that within the open source community. And it gets around particularly US lawyers and afraid about IP. So what we've been quite interested working together on this is just to show, I want to just kind of give a quick view on this, was that in the context of R&D and in the kind of global research that's out there, like open source plays a massive part within that, even within industries that we might think are more closed source. They are engaging that quite a lot, and I'm sure that's come across a lot of us in there. But it is just to show there's a lot of funding mechanisms that we have available that's out there to help both industry and collaboration with academia. And then also there's the whole European projects and Horizon Europe and et cetera, that goes within that. The general takeaway that I have seen over the last 12 months talking with a range of companies has been that the open source piece seems to be a growing part within their R&D roadmaps and what they're looking at, which has been quite interesting. That has been kind of a shift than what we'd have traditionally seen, which is more develop software, lock it down, keep it within that. But there is now kind of moving back to that. So it's kind of, I suppose, the early things of the early noughties and the internet, was old enough to remember all of that, where we had seen that the huge influx that was starting with that. Now I think we're starting to see a shift again, kind of going back to open source to some degree. And I just thought it'd be nice just to give a perspective that as the development agency and where we fund R&D and we've got really core strategic targets in doing that across multiple new emerging sectors, we are encouraging companies to be looking at open source as a strategic pillar within their R&D and how we're doing that, and particularly collaborations with the university and wider open systems as well. So that's it, just a quick overview.
Thanks a million for that. That was great. I just wanted to check in and see if anyone had any questions for John.
Yeah. Sorry, just on the, because we've talked before as well about these collaboration opportunities. I'm just wondering, like practically speaking, how do you match them? So like you've got these companies coming in, they're doing something maybe like niche in, I mean, I don't even know if these things are niche, they're probably huge areas that I'm just not familiar with. But like how do you match them then with potential researchers in the academics ecosystem?
Yeah, so a lot of the work that the approach we take with that is going through the research centres here. And so normally in collaboration with the coordinators within the research centres, asking them, saying, look, here's a problem statement, this is what some of the clients looking for. Do you have any researchers who are in that space? Do you know anybody who's doing something? This may not be in Ireland, maybe across Europe as well, and opportunities in there. And one of the things I suppose is because we're connected within that, we're able to help do that bridge between us. In fairness to a lot of multinational companies, they're not aware of the ecosystems that are in there. Particularly US companies are not aware of research within Europe, and particularly research within Ireland. I think that's so there's a big piece about kind of pushing that awareness. Often the comment that we get is like, oh, like, is there really research in Europe? Sometimes that can come up as a topic. And then like you have to outline it and show it. And then they go, oh, actually, that's really good. And what I would say, which has been really interesting, is that over the last 12 to 18 months, we have noticed companies now moving up in terms of looking at PhDs and postdocs within their R&D at scale in Ireland. And like that is a very substantial change where it was before, which was like localization and originally things come back saying, you know, it's kind of flipped. And what that has really driven is a more of a demand for collaboration with the university sectors. And we're seeing companies set up specific programs as well. And IBM actually have IBM Research here, for example. And we've also seen companies like Workday doing collaboration projects. And they're actually sponsoring a professorship in cyber in that area. So it is changing. And I think the one learning that we've seen from FDI companies, the ones who are engaging, like Qualcomm down in Cork, they've doubled the number of engineers, things. It's all growing on that side.
Any other questions or observations from anyone? Yeah.
Well, it was to the comment you made after Kieran's talk and Kieran's talk. I'm Steve Dunn and I work at Novi. One of those dreaded technology transfer people that were talking to next door earlier. There is a concern around the product liability directive and this cybersecurity. You mentioned at the end, that you asked a question and academic and commercial, and the liability lies with the commercial once they deploy. But of course, a lot of technology actually comes out of universities and is actually commercialized by universities. So you kind of referenced a very black and white scenario, but there is, I don't know if Kieran, if you have any kind of advice regarding developing, like how are the, I mean, I have so many questions, but I mean, how are the open source, software licenses compliant with the product liability directive? The whole thing around warranties and liabilities as is, and that's an issue for deployers, but for universities in particular, it's a big issue when you're commercializing something, because it seems to me that they're not.
So the interaction between free and open source licenses and public liability directive is actually very simple, but unfortunately it goes not in the direction we like. Our licenses all say this is provided as is, we disclaim warranty. But you're only allowed to disclaim warranty to the extent that the law allows you to disclaim warranty. So if the law says you're liable for X, then you writing in your license, you're not liable for anything, doesn't change. So unfortunately, the product liability directive, we worked on that as well, and we got a lot of clarifications in there for free and open source software. So it's not too bad. And the thing is, when you look around at a lot of countries in Europe, a lot of them already had laws like this in place already, Germany in particular. So the situation probably won't change all that much with the public liability directive. What we do have to do is we have to monitor the implementation in the member state level, because the directive tells you a minimum set of things you have to have in your laws. The risk then is that some member states might either misinterpret or may do a thing called gold plating, where they say, well, we'll go above and beyond, and then they end up bringing in something that wouldn't have been problematic with a bare bones, normal implementation of the public liability directive, but then if you go further, this can create problems. So to come back to what Claire said, the issue of universities and commerciality, we won't get into an answer for every situation. Unfortunately, it is unclear sometimes, but the mechanism, just for anyone who's interested, is that one of the things we got added into the Cyber Resilience Act is that there's in the recital about free and open source software, it says commerciality in the development phase does not influence commerciality at the placing on the market phase. So the thing of funding software, like if a piece of software development or research was funded by a university or a company, that doesn't imply that distributing software on the market afterwards is a commercial act. So there's a separation between the development phase and the distribution phase.